Namaste, and welcome to the 2026 World Predictions presentation. I think this is year 38 doing this, so I've been doing it for a long time. And I think this year is going to be quite interesting. But before we start, I want to talk about a couple of things. As usual, we're going to, there's the email for, if you want to get on the newsletter, you can sign up on the website. It's a free newsletter, which most of you are on already. And as usual, I want to start with a mantra to Ganesh. Just do it 9 times. Om Ganapataye Namaha. 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 All right. So again, when I start a talk, I usually defer to my teachers. First of all, M.K. Gandhi, who was a great astrologer in London. I worked for him there. I was with him for about 5 years, and it's where I cut my teeth in Vedic astrology, sleeping on the floor, making horoscopes for one of the busiest astrologers in the world, and just kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of it. And then he's the one who told me to learn it. And then he started letting me do charts in his office when he would be gone. And that's how I got into it. Kind of like jumping in the deep end of the pool. Okay, then after Gandhi passed away, I met Shivanandamurti, a great teacher from India, one of those, great souls that even the Shankaracharyas in India, the sort of popes of the Hindus, they would go to visit Shivanandamurti. He was so well respected. Anyway, he's the one who encouraged me to keep doing these presentations. He had me help him put on a world conference on mundane astrology in Visakhapatnam in 2010. And it was there that he predicted that in 2020, the world would go into crisis. We were having a conversation, and he said, Mr. Kelleher, I don't know why he called me Mr. Kelleher, but that's what he called me, Mr. Kelleher. They're saying that the Mayans, there's this big thing about the Mayan calendar coming to an end in 2012, and people are saying the world's going to end. He said, we need to put on a conference and kind of, give our opinions as Vedic astrologers. And he was an amazing Vedic astrologer, by the way. And so anyway, we put on this conference. A couple of years later, I think it was next year, he invited myself and David Frawley and his wife Shambhavi to come and just sort of powwow together at his place with him to refine some of these predictions that he had made. And that's where I came up with the timing of 2020 as being January of 2020, and the thing that I was pointing to was the possible pandemic. And we discussed that, and he agreed. And so we're I put that in my talks in 2016. And then I took it out the next year because I thought it was a little too inflammatory. I thought it'd scare people. But in any case, 2020 rolled around, and then we we kind of realized that this is, the world had changed at that point. Anyway, let's go on with the preliminary stuff. And I know a lot of you have come year after year. You hear this year after year. This first part is kind of always the same because there's always new people who come and people who aren't familiar with Vedic astrology. So I have to kind of just give you a real quick little uh, a couple of comments about how Vedic astrology is different. So one of the ways in which Vedic astrology is different is that we use a different zodiac. The zodiac we use is called a sidereal zodiac. And that just means it's a little closer to actually much closer to what an astronomer would use, where you look up in the sky and you reference the placements of the planets against the constellations in the sky, like an astronomer would with a telescope. Whereas in Western astrology, they don't do that. What they do is they reference the placements of the planets against the seasons of the year. That's called tropical astrology. Ours is called sidereal astrology. And the Western, I always get the comment, from clients, new clients, oh, you mean Vedic astrology is more accurate? And I'll go, well, actually the astrology itself is not necessarily more accurate. As a matter of fact, if you get a good Western astrologer and a good Vedic astrologer, put them side by side, they'll probably be about equally accurate if they're good at what they do. And the Western zodiac is not wrong. It actually is. We have that in Vedic astrology. We have a tropical zodiac. It's not used for doing horoscopes, but it is recognized and it's valid. So, a Western chart just shows a different angle on it, and Vedic astrology shows its particular perspective. And the other thing that's very different about Vedic astrology is the concept of the nakshatras. So, most people are used to the signs of the zodiac, and that would, the zodiac is a belt of sky surrounding the Earth in a circle. And if you divide it into 12 equal constellations of stars, you get the 12 signs of the zodiac. And if you divide it into 27 equal constellations of stars, you get the 27 nakshatras. So nakshatras are just like signs. They're constellations of stars, groupings of stars, but they're smaller and there are more of them. And they're really much more densely packed with symbolism. And it's the nakshatras which are sort of like the main event in Vedic astrology. That's the thing that really makes Vedic astrology stand out. That symbolism is amazing. Anyway, let's start with the big picture now. This is where we kind of look at the world as a whole. And this part's been evolving over the course of my lectures. At first, when I started doing these lectures, I didn't really have a way to look at the big picture. For one thing, in the classical Hindu approach to this, ancient Vedic approach to this, there is a yuga system. This is a yuga. The yugas are like huge swaths of time. You can see Sat Yuga, which is a period of 1,728,000 years. What are you going to do with that? And that's, according to this yuga system, a period of, enlightenment, the highest level of evolution. And then after that, descending downward to Treta Yuga, also a very enlightened time, 1,296,000 years long. And then Dwapara Yuga, a bronze period, which is sort of like, technical and scientific. That's 864,000 years. And then Kali Yuga, which is a dark age, is sort of like misery and suffering. So that's the scheme of things. And, although if you're a devout Hindu, then we'll focus on this and it will just be taken as, yes, this is the way it is, and this is the yuga we're in. And I'm not challenging that at all. But in talking to most Vedic scholars, including David Frawley and also Shivanandamurti and also Sri Yukteswar, who was Paramahansa Yogananda's teacher, this system seems to not be very practical for what's going on Earth, just because it's covering too big of a swath of time. So according to that, Sri Yukteswar came up with a yoga that totally makes sense. This is closer to how Western astrologers do it in some ways, in that his yoga system was based on the fact that at the time of the vernal equinox, which is the first day of spring, every year the sun, will be at a slightly earlier position in the zodiac. And if you go back in time, well, actually, I'll talk about that in a second. But based on this, the precessional precessional degree, the sun's position at the time of the equinox, goes all the way around the zodiac in 25,000 years, and he proposed, based on the Manu Samhita, he proposed a system of yugas that was also using the same idea, Kali Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and this seems to work much better and seems to define periods of human existence, and human development. And so in this case, the yuga starts with Kali Yuga at 285 AD, when the sun at the time of the vernal equinox, at the time of the beginning of springtime, was exactly 0 degrees of Pisces. And then it develops, through first part of it is the dark age of Kali. That makes sense, right up to 1485, dark ages pretty much. And then from 1485 onward, which is very close to the time of Columbus and the printing press, was Dwapara Yuga beginning, which is the beginning of science and technology, and Columbus, and it's expansive in knowledge and expansive in communications and expansive in travel. And so that's the one we're in right now, and that goes for 2,400 years from 1485 AD. So that's where we are. Yeah.
I think you said 0 degrees Pisces for the beginning at 285. I think it's 0 degrees Aries, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Great.
That's
No problem.
yeah. This is one of the things. Oh, I forgot to introduce the two moderators today. One is Michael Bully, and the other
Hello.
is Sharu,
Hi.
who both of them will be doing exactly what Sharu just did, which is to if I say Pisces instead of Aries, they need to let me know so I don't have to do this afterwards and do all my editing after the fact. Okay, yeah. So the 285 AD thing was when the sun the sun at the time of the vernal equinox was at 0 degrees of Aries, and then from there it backed into the sign of Pisces. And this is now we're in Dwapara Yuga, so that's where we are, and it makes sense that we're in a kind of a Bronze Age. Everybody can relate, to all the development that's taken place since 1485, when Dwapara Yuga began. Okay, so this is one to remember because this is an upward moving, improving kind of period, and essentially it's related to science and technology and knowledge. So it's related to the intellect. Okay, so this is a little description of how the vernal equinox works. I'm not going to get into this, but it's based on the precessional degree and a wobble in the Earth's spin, and just showing this in a picture form here. There's 0 degrees of Aries or 30 degrees of Pisces, where the sun was on the first day of springtime. In that chart, it was at 0 degrees of Aries, and from there, over the course of time, it just gradually went, to earlier degrees and earlier degrees and earlier degrees, and then right now we're at about 5 degrees of Pisces. And so what that does is it gives us a way of defining ages. So, if you look at where this is tracing in the zodiac, the sign of Pisces, then what you have is a Pisces period, a period when the sun moved into Pisces and generally at 285 AD, and it continues there right up to the end of the cycle. And when it leaves Pisces, and then after that, we go into the period of Aquarius. And I've said this before, contrary to the 1960s song, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. They kind of got it wrong. That won't be for a few hundred years still. Okay, so up until 2445 is when it will go. 285 to 2445. We're in the Pisces period. It makes sense, at least at this time, because Pisces, which is related to the oceans, in many ways during this period has been really first and foremost. There, in the second half of this period, Columbus is sailing on the ocean, and all this international travel is taking place over the ocean, and now we're destroying our oceans, and the oceans kind of become the source of our demise on a certain level. So, it's a big period kind of focusing and pointing to the ocean as like a primary ingredient of our experience. Now, here's the same picture again. Here's the sun at 5 degrees of Pisces again. There's the Pisces axis there. But going alongside it is a further division that we make. Remember, I talked about nakshatras. And if you look in Pisces, the last 13 degrees, 20 minutes of Pisces is Revati nakshatra. The middle 13 degrees, 20 minutes of Pisces is Uttarabhadra nakshatra, and the first 3 degrees and 20 minutes of Pisces is Purvabhadra nakshatra. Okay, so Revati is ruled by Mercury, Uttarabhadra by Saturn, and Purvabhadra by Jupiter. That means that when we're in this last part, in the last part, in the Mercury part, you're in the Revati part, that's at Mercury's period for the world. And then when the sun is moving through over the course of the years, Uttarabhadra nakshatra, we're in a Saturn period. And that's where we are now. And then it goes into Purvabhadra when we get to around 3 degrees, 20 minutes of Pisces. That'll be a big junction point there. And that's Jupiter's period. That's when Jupiter's period starts. Okay, so this is how, I've always known this is a way to do it, but I couldn't work it out mathematically because I had to figure out, the time of the vernal equinox in 285 AD. And we just didn't have available, maybe NASA had it, but it wasn't available to the common person, the ephemerises that we could use, the astrological calculation software. But recently it's become available, and based on that now we have actually a chart for this overall cycle. But anyway, let's move on here. So that brings the idea of a world nakshatra dasha, which means that we're tracing the sun's movement backwards in the sign of Pisces, and which nakshatras it's going through, and therefore what planetary periods we can be in. So right now we're in a period of Saturn, and that Saturn, when it says Saturn Mahadasha, which just means it's the major period of Saturn. A second here. Okay, it's a major period of Saturn, and that goes up until 2204, and that, by the way, is the junction point between the Saturn major period and the Jupiter subperiod, Jupiter major period, which will be a period of dramatic change also. Okay, so anyway, so when we look at it this way. Hold on a second here. We can further break down the periods so that each major period has a subperiod. Right now, from 1915 to 2054, we're in the Saturn major period and the Mercury subperiod. Now, there was an ancient author called Kalidasa, and Kalidasa was a poet, and he was a yogi, and he was a great saint, and he was also an astrologer. A lot of people don't know that. He's famous in India, but a lot of people don't remember that he was actually an astrologer. He wrote a text called the Kalamritam, and in the Kalamritam, he said about the Saturn major period and the sub period of Mercury. He said, knowledge will increase, children will prosper, relatives meet with success. Okay, in other words, this is a period when things improved. Now, of course, a lot of other things. He couldn't see the chart of the world, and he wouldn't, and he never even. I think he would roll over in his grave if he thought. Of course, he isn't in a grave. He was probably cremated. Anyway, he would roll over in the Ganges if he saw me applying this to a world horoscope. It's just like, what on earth? How would this be done? But anyway, this is, um, something that it depends how you particularly will describe these periods and how you'll predict from them. It really depends on what is going on in the actual horoscope with the planet involved, Mercury. But in any case, this is a period when knowledge is increasing. That's the big thing about this, because this is a Mercury period, the planet of the intellect and information and communications. And I think everybody would agree that since 1915, there's been a boom with that. And that was right when the radio and the telephone and all that stuff was kind of happening, and, and telegraph and all that stuff was just going crazy. Um, so, so, yeah, this is really increased. Okay, and then in 2054, we go into the last subperiod. And for those of you who are astrologers, you have to realize this goes backwards. This is a reverse, Saturn period. So the last subperiod is going to be the first subperiod, the one that we normally use as the first subperiod, which is Saturn. Anyway, that takes place between 2054 and 2204. So that's about a 150-year period where Saturn's going to be the major player, the major indicator of events. And so about that, Kalidasa said, disease appears, the body languishes, loss of children and money is to be feared, serious enmity arises, relatives cause disputes, troubles come upon the native for his relatives. And once again, you don't want to take this literally because this is meant for people, but you can take this as symbol. It's going to be more challenging for health for people generally. It will be, and disease appears, the body languishes. That's the first thing he says. It's going to be a more unfriendly place, in terms of health and that sort of thing. And then he said, loss of children and money is to be feared. Well, again, it can just indicate, life being more difficult generally. All these things. We don't have to go through each one of them, but and that just shows that this is a period that's starting around that time that is, just you should notice a bit of a phase transition that takes place around, especially around the junction point, the first year of the period, you start to notice the effect of that period. And this, remember, we're in the Mercury subperiod, and the Mercury subperiod can be broken down further into what some people call them antaras, some people call them pratyantars. But anyway, we'll call it the just sub period. So that would be the Mercury, we're in Ketu sub period. And that's the period from 2024 to 2032. Ketu's sub period, which has just started last year, Ketu is related to technology and healing and spirituality and science and new energy sources and environment. You can see on the list here, some of those are more challenging. Warfare, it's very much involved with warfare. They say Ketu is like Mars, and so we've had a couple of different things kind of flaring up during this period. Especially the last couple of years here. Anyway, that's the one we're in right now, and it's just something to keep in mind. And then you go into the Mercury period after that in 2032, and that will be Mercury, the Mercury minor cycle. So again, see, part of this is related to AI. AI just came on the scene right after. I mean, we had the wars, but that took place there. But AI came on, in 2024, big time, and now it's just going crazy. But this is a kind of a formative period. And when I'm thinking about K2, if I'm thinking about K2 for example, in a chart of a child, I think of that time when the child is kind of in a foggy, dreamy place, where their intellect hasn't formed yet. They haven't really formed their personality yet. They haven't quite figured out who they are. And they're just sort of like kind of going with all kind of intuition and emotion. So then after, Mercury comes next, uh, and as a result, that is when the intellect forms. Okay. And what we should see around that time, 2032, is a shift that goes on with AI into a much more verbal, mental, articulate, communicative. It's already just going great with that, but it's still making all kinds of mistakes. If you ask it to research something, you have to double check it because it can just dream stuff up and invent stuff, and you ask it for a quote and it makes up one for you sometimes. It's just ridiculous. But that's a kid. That's a little baby. That's what they do, and, they make something up. And you say, are you sure you heard that? Well, yeah. So this is infancy for AI, but you'll see it's kind of go into adolescence in 2032. So this gives you kind of a little map there. And here's a actually wrong way. Here is what happened here. Oh, I see what happened. Okay, this is a chart that kind of puts it all together. Okay, at the top we've got Kali Yuga, which is that big broad period of the Dark Age. This is mostly thought to be valid, but more valid for the evolution of the universe rather than just for man. I think it does apply to mankind though too. Um, but but it just means, okay, in the very most fundamental background, the world has been since the according to the Vedic tradition, since the death of Lord Krishna, who is a great incarnation of Vishnu, the last incarnation of Vishnu, in this dark age. Okay, the Jain cosmology does a similar thing with that. Only they say it's since the death of Mahavir. But anyway, same idea, and that this dark age is there, and it's a time when it's a little more difficult in a lot of ways. Okay, but that's in the background. The stuff we really notice is this Dwapara Yuga phase, this thing that goes, and it's going in an upward direction. So keep this in your mind because this is taking us towards more and more technological, scientific, informational, educational kind of, our brains are going to explode during this period. In other words, knowledge is exploding, and it's only in the beginning of that. And, you might think that this is not necessarily good. AI isn't good. I get it. There are all the drawbacks to increased technology and increased science and but if you really look at it, you'll find that stuff has actually improved the quality of our life tremendously, as a overall world population over time. Anyway, so then there is this other thing, this nakshatra dasha, and if you look at that, this is bringing up the quality of life and everything, even moral development and everything in the period from 1915. But it starts to also move more downward. It's already kind of moving in a certain type of spiral, sort of tapering off right now and kind of moving into a spiral, so where it'll kind of go in a downward phase, and then it's going to move up again into the continuing on its course in Dwapara Yuga. So this is, it's kind of like up and down, a little bit of up and down, which is how these cycles always go. And right now we're kind of in a period that is, an important one, because what has happened is that the sun at the time of the vernal equinox, we said it's down at 5 degrees of Pisces. That's really close to the galactic center. And the galactic center is located at 3 degrees of Pisces. That's right where the junction point between the two periods, the Saturn period and the Jupiter period, is located. So we arrive at that point, at the time when Pisces period, actually, when the Jupiter period starts. I'll go back to just find that one for you here. So the Jupiter period uh, goes to 2204 when Saturn period ends, 2204. And so that's when the junction point, that's when when we get to the galactic center. And I'm talking about that. That actually, I think I made a mistake there. It's not that the vernal equinox is going to be lining up with the galactic center. It's the sun at the time of at the time of the winter solstice that is lining up with the galactic center at in that around that time. The symbology of that is that since the winter solstice represents our connection to the earth, then this is really right about the environmental development. The lining up with the winter solstice is about our environmental experience, and many astrologers are thinking about this like the reset button. It's like the reset button's being pushed, and the world is sort of having to shift gears in order to realign itself with cosmic will and dharma and and nature. So one of the things is, I mean, this can tell you is that on one level, we look at this and we go, oh my God, what's going to happen? Oh my God, whatever the issue is, we can point to 100 different things we don't like right now. And then there's just something that's happened, in every generation, which is, or I should say every, I guess, century, is there comes a period when everybody thinks the world is going to end. That was exactly the reason that Shivananda Murti wanted to do that world conference on mundane astrology, to say the world is not going to end. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. Yes. And we're definitely going through some challenging periods. And he even pointed to 2020 as sort of like the beginning of things starting to unravel towards our, eventual kind of reset. And we're in the process of moving towards that, but it's going to take a long time as far as I can see here. And that makes sense because we're talking about the environment, and the world's been around for a gazillion years. Okay. So let's start with now the USA chart. I think I got through that a little faster than I did in the previous years because we've done that over and over and over again. I'm sure some of you are getting really bored with the big picture, but I think it's just fascinating myself. Because you have to look at the context. The context is everything, the bigger periods subsume the smaller ones. The smaller ones can only do, what the bigger period allows. So when we're looking at these more global shifts, it colors everything we talk about. Okay. So we're talking about the United States. The first thing we want to talk about is Donald Trump. In the past, I talked about the chart first, and then I maybe bring in the president a little bit. But nowadays, I'm looking at Donald Trump and his chart as equally important almost to the chart of the United States, because he is a tremendously influential character, to say the least. And some geopolitics experts say he's the most disruptive leader in the world, or in the democratic world. Sometimes they say it that way. I would just say he's the most disruptive leader in the world. He's the one that has more ability to, influence everybody. I mean, we could say it's just the democratic world, but in fact, when he has a different thing he wants to do and he just decides he's going to do tariffs or he decides he's going to invade somewhere, everybody just pays attention and gets a little upset and reshifts and, that sort of thing. So, no question that he has power. But he's not the most powerful man in the world. That would be Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping is the most powerful man in the world because he has um, no institutional checks on him. He can do whatever he wants, pretty much. And the whole country will just do what he wants immediately. You should see them build a bridge. They can do it in about 3 weeks, because he gets everybody on it and it just works. So China just can, make progress so fast and it can pivot so fast. There's nobody can touch them in that respect. And then Narendra Modi would be the most popular leader in the world. India has overtaken China in terms of population, and so he's the leader of the biggest democracy in the world, and tremendously popular. And like Xi Jinping, he has a lot of autonomy, not as much as Xi Jinping, but he's a really important leader too. But just to clarify, if we put these in terms of, who's the most powerful, well, Donald Trump isn't the only guy that's able to influence people. He's really influencing a lot of people right now, but these guys have tenure. These guys can hang around. I mean, Xi Jinping, there's nobody can hold him back. He's president for life, or general secretary for life. But Narendra Modi, he's got a lot of support, and people keep reelecting him. He's been, the prime minister for a decade. So that's different from, Trump. At least if the laws hold, and Trump doesn't, change them, which is certainly a possibility. I mean, he's surprised everybody, and he's broken every rule. And so, who knows? Maybe he'll get, he'll be able to change the rules in some way so he can run for another term. I don't know. But if the laws hold, he's going to be out of office soon. Okay. Anyway, so with Donald Trump, one of the things about him, and it's as clear in his horoscope, and I talked about this in 2017, he was right around the first time he was elected and he took office. I gave a talk on Donald Trump, and what I said was essentially, and I have to say it made a few people, a little annoyed with me. I got some criticisms about it. I said he was a card-carrying narcissist, and the thing is, when I'm looking at a chart, I don't mean that as a criticism of Trump in the sense of, oh, he's a bad person and all that stuff. I mean it as a description, because I'm looking at it after looking at thousands of horoscopes in my life, and even, and part of my study was in, I remember one long period when I was studying just periods of people who had deviant behavior of one sort or another. And one of the things that I did, I remember one weekend in the process of that, I took a book called Profiles in Crime, which was just simply a book of astrological data, birth dates and times and places for hundreds of people, written by Lois Rodden, who is a Western astrologer. And I went through every single chart in that book, and I found, all these patterns. One of the patterns I saw was egocentrism, narcissism, overconfidence. These were patterns in the chart, which would otherwise look like somebody else's chart if you take any one of the qualities by themselves. Like in Donald Trump's chart, he's got his moon is Scorpio. My mother had moon is Scorpio. Was she like Donald Trump? No way. But in this chart, he's got it in a nakshatra connected with Indra, the king of the gods, who wants to dominate. He's got Mars in the first house, which is, a military general. I'm in charge, and his father used to say, "You're a killer, you're a king." To him, this was his mantra that he would always say. And you tell him not to be weak and to go in and kill people. In other words, take what you need, be a shark, that kind of thing. And he's got his Saturn and Venus in the 12th house, which typically is in the charts of people who don't always feel like they're, loved. And in that position, he also the position of his moon in the chart also gives him a sense of always being overlooked and never being recognized. So this is a guy who never felt like he was loved. His father was aggressive and abusive to his mother and family members, and always criticizing him. And he always felt like he was overlooked and not appreciated, and always told to be a shark. And then he's got a sun in the 10th house, which says, "I want to make money, and that's it. That's my prime directive." Getting at the person's core value is really important, to kind of know what's the most important thing in their life. It helps because you know that then when they make a decision, they're going to make it for certain reasons. I see charts of people who spiritualize all the time. It's sort of like everything's got to be spiritual. And you always know that every time they react to something, it's going to be from that spiritual perspective. That can be a very good thing. It can also be something that holds them back. Well, in Donald Trump's chart, he does everything from this point of view of, does it magnify me? Does it give me more power? Am I the boss? And also he has a personal ethics, which basically says, I should be able to do whatever I want to do. There's no rules that should hold me. Okay, and so right now, Donald Trump has a sign period going on of Leo, and Mars is in Leo. That's the one in the first house there in the chart. This period goes from June of 2025 to June of 2028. Now, he was aggressive and assertive and, a bit of a warrior, and he's always fighting, and he's had more lawsuits, that he's had against other people and against him than I think he must have a Guinness Book of World Records for any one person, I would imagine. I don't know if that's true or not, but boy, he just tends to always be fighting with somebody. And so he's always had that because that's a basic tendency in his personality. However, this has been activated with this Mars cycle, which goes from June 6th of 2025 to June of 2028. So this is coming out in a strong way. And so the stuff we've just seen at the very beginning of this, where he invaded Venezuela, and captured Maduro, and when there was another thing he did recently. What was it? Wasn't there something else he did, Michael, in this last since about June or so that was sort of just his remarks about Greenland, for example. We want to take over Greenland. Anyway, so what's going on at the Pentagon also really reflects this quality in his chart. In the Pentagon, the Trump administration removed or replaced several of the military top legal officers. And these guys are the senior judge advocates general who traditionally advise generals on whether their orders comply with U.S. law and the laws of war. Okay. So he replaced them with guys that lined up with his in his side, his political persuasion. And then the Justice Department, he, got rid of, a bunch of the career prosecutors and civil rights attorneys, and they were reassigned or they resigned and or got pushed out. And so essentially, again, he replaced them with political appointees who were going to do whatever he said. And so what this means is it's taking the brakes off of the whole constraint to executive power. So he can pretty much do what he wants. And with that, now the military becomes his tool. There's nobody going to tell him that's going to tell him you can't go into Venezuela. In fact, they'll be looking for for legal reasons why he can, or you can't go into any other country. You can't invade Greenland or something. So he's he's discovered a toy. It's like a little child who has discovered that he can get away with something. It's something that works for him now, and so he's going to do it until he can't. And that's one of the things about his Scorpio moon in his horoscope and his Mars in the first house, which is that it causes him to push boundaries. This is a classic Scorpio thing: is pressing the boundary to find out where the limits are. And, there are, again, tons of Scorpios that are just absolutely, most Scorpios are just absolutely, good people, and they're not, doing this in a negative way. But he does this sort of pathologically. He's always done this, which is he'll try to see how much he can get away with. How much tax can I evade legally? And then how about illegally through a loophole that I could argue? And he'll go right up to the brink, and then he'll back off if somebody pushes him too much. So that's what he's doing with ICE right now, and all this stuff we hear about from these raids that are going on for illegal immigrants. And notice how he's done this in a very aggressive way, which is in line with his chart. They're masked, they're in black, they have these military vehicles, that come with them sometimes, and they're just they kind of take the bully's approach to it, which essentially, I mean, that's a good word for Donald Trump, is that he has a side to him that is a bully. And you know how bullies work. It's he'll take your lunch if you in the schoolyard if you let him. If you don't let him, if you stand up to him, in some way, chances are he'll back off. And that's been shown to be true for Trump, at least so far. But he's got a lot of power here, and now that the constraints, the brakes have come off, it will be interesting to watch what he does with this, especially with the military. And it'll be interesting to see if he uses his personal military, ICE, or even the National Guard at some way at the time of voting at some point, and with the idea that he can justify it legally. Who knows? But I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying I'm not gonna put anything beyond Trump's capacity here, because I mean, he's just unpredictable and predictable in his unpredictability, I guess. Okay, so here's the chart of Minnesota. And Minnesota is interesting because, that's where the last ICE fiasco took place just over the weekend. And basically, if you look at that chart, they're in a Mars major period. And that is up to, the major period goes up to August of 2028. And that pretty much, takes it to the end of Trump's, term in office. Well, the thing is, the end of Mars period is no big deal, but their Mars is in the 11th house, which is the house of the masses, the public demonstrations and that sort of thing. And it's in Scorpio, and Mars in Scorpio is just really power oriented, it's power and control oriented. And in this case, it's even in a combination, which, now, for those of you who are astrologers, this isn't a technical Ruchaka yoga, but it's a functional Ruchaka yoga because it's in the 9th house from the moon there. And anyway, it's a placement that basically, they say, makes the person a military general. So, this in their chart, it just indicates that they experience the sort of intrusive influence of the U.S. military, in their group, gatherings, and that during this period, the tendency to be outraged by that and to revolt from that and to, push back against power and to protest and all that is just more. So I would bet this is not going to be the first. I guess this is not going to be the last time that Minnesota has issues with the Trump administration, over power and control moves that are done. Okay, so, and then they're going to go into a K2 subperiod in February of 2026. February 24th goes to July 23rd. That could be a period of uncertainty there. K2 is in the eighth house of the horoscope. That's also a kind of a very challenging place. So I don't think the Minnesotans are going to be happy with Trump in that period, and there may be more fallout, from this type of activity that takes place during that time. Okay, now in the U.S. horoscope, the U.S. is in a Rahu period, and let me pause for a second. So while we're doing this, if you're chatting, you can put things in the chat area if you have questions, and if enough of you have the same question, either Michael or Sharu will pass it on to me or stop me, and maybe we can kind of, you can ask some questions along the way. So don't hesitate to ask your questions. If there are a lot of questions, I won't be able to do that much, but some of them I may be able to answer, and then I'll make some time for questions at the end. So the U.S. right now is in a Rahu period. Now, I've gone through this whole chart for the United States before with people, and describing what it's based on and all that. This was based on my a rectification of the chart for the United States that I did. But what's interesting about this, I'll just mention this here for those of you who are astrologers, and sometimes I'll go, the United States didn't start. The Declaration of Independence was not signed in 1776 on July 4th. And that's historical record. Well, yes, that's true. But what did happen on that time, and this is also historical record, is that Thomas Jefferson wrote it out. And it took him all day to get it done. And he sent it to the printer. And it was dated as July 4th, 1776. So that was the date that the Constitution was born, and it was sent to the printers right at the time that I rectified it for. Now, I didn't know this in advance, but that's essentially when he sent it out. He sent it in the evening around dinner time and to the printer. So anyway, that this is what the chart is for. Is for that, and that even though they signed it a few days later, or actually a couple months later, I think, it doesn't matter, because this was the conception chart. That's a chart like the difference between there's a time when someone is born and there's a time when they're conceived, and both of those are good charts. So this is a perfect time. And from a classical reference, even a better time for for the birth chart. Okay, so that chart is in a Rahu period right now. And we've talked about this in multiple world predictions talks. Since the time that the US was born, it's been through 3 Rahu periods. They take 18 years, and the first one was, the revolution itself. It was born in 1776, and so it was born in the first section, a little bit into the Rahu period, this Rahu major period and Rahu sub period. And that, what they say about that sub period is death of the king, master, senior partner, or head of the family. Well, at that point, it was the death of the king. It was the British government and the British king, were going away because they were revolting against him. Anyway, that this has been related to various revolutionary periods when you decide to break the law, change things. You're not subscribing to convention anymore. You're fed up with it, and at the same time, industrial revolutions. Rahu is the planet of um, science and technology and AI and if you look at each one of these, they refer to this is 2000. Let's see, 1775 to 1793. That was the steam technology period. And then the next one, I've got this pop up there, 1895 to 1913. That was, when, the telegraph and the telephone and the, light bulb and all that stuff was changing. Electricity was changing technology tremendously. And then the technological revolution of 2015, 2033, which is AI and green energy and, all this stuff that's going on with high tech and AI. Okay, so that said, it was also a period of imperialism. All three of these were. The first one was a revolt against an imperial nation. The second one was that was the one from 1895 to 1913. That was a period when how the boy gets beaten by his son, and then the son ends up spanking his son. And he said he would have sworn he'd never do that, but he did it anyway. Well, if you go back, now in this particular Rahu period we're in, Trump is going into other countries talking about, occupying them and being, and taking them over. So we're going to run Venezuela, and Canada's just another U.S. state, and Greenland is, we're going to take that over. We're going to buy it. Okay. So William McKinley was in the last Rahu period, close to 1900, and that period was 1890s. He was elected president in the same period, the same sub-period, I think it was 1897. And that was in the same sub-period as Trump's first term. And he was a famous nationalist. He was totally down on immigration. He was into having growth as fast as possible. He was really, really into business. And, he hung out with all the tycoons, and he, valued, those people more. And he was a protectionist, and he was like a big tariffs guy. And he was also just an imperialist. And in his administration, he had the Spanish-American War. The U.S. annexed Hawaii. The U.S. took over Cuba. And then later on in the rest of the Rahu period, other presidents, took over the, Panama Canal. There was this Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which was, taken by Teddy Roosevelt. He did this one, which was, it said the U.S. has the right to intervene anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. It's like we decree it. Okay, and this is, it's right from Donald Trump's playbook here, or we can say that, his attitude now is right from Teddy Roosevelt's playbook. They occupied the Dominican Republic, the interventions in Cuba. They had this thing called the Great White Fleet, which they sent 16 battleships around the world to intimidate everybody. So if you think this is the first time we've had, an imperialistic tendency in the United States, all you got to do is go back to the last Rahu period, and you'll see that it was happening at that time. Okay. And so they made cartoons about him, about McKinley, that is. So here he's at dinner, and they've got the menu on the wall, Puerto Rico pig, the Sandwich Islands, Filipino floating islands. Okay, so anyway, the idea here is that they made fun of him. It wasn't comfortable for most people what he was doing. He was an elitist. And now we have our own version of this, and he's, looking for real estate all over the world. What can he do now? He's like king, is what he's always wanted to do, you know? Um, this is what happens when a narcissist is in charge, he acts from whatever the heck he wants to do. He feels like he's a king. He should be a king. As a matter of fact, his Mars is in a nakshatra symbolized by a throne room. You can check that for me, Michael, and just make sure. I think that's Magha there.
That's correct.
Yeah. So anyway, it gives him the idea of literally being a king, and his father told him that his whole life, and he is in his happy place right now, and not, because what's happening to him is what's happened to him his whole life when he has acted like a king, as the people resist him and tell him he's a bully, and they don't like it when he lies, cheats, or steals, or does any other thing that he feels is okay because it's his own personal moral code he's going by. Okay, anyway, with the group,
James,
go ahead.
A little bit off track, but somebody has noticed that in the Trump's chart, when looking at the Charadasha, not quite lining up with what they're getting in their program, and it's like there's a little bit of a difference. They don't show them until going into Leo for one more year. Did you want to comment at all about Charadasha calculations?
Yeah, I see. Mainly what I use in my practice is Vimshotri Dasha, which is the main planetary period system. I'm using Charadasha this year because it seems to be working pretty well for me. But Charadasha has got so many ways to calculate it and so many different opinions about it that it is sometimes a little dubious. But I'm just going to leave it at that because even the two people with the same computer program, unless they have exactly the right settings and everything on it, they won't come up with exactly the same period here. But this is something I've kind of been working with for a while, and I'm comfortable with what I'm using right now. But because it takes so long to kind of try to get, consistency between two computers and two computer programs, I can't help people with that, unfortunately. They'll just have to kind of try some different settings and try find something that works for you and then just stick with it. Okay, so with Greenland now, Greenland is in their chart. Just the thing here is that right now they're in a major period of Rahu. Remember? So Rahu, and they're in the first subperiod of Rahu, April 2025 to January 2028. One of the things this does, as I said earlier, is it doesn't like people who have this kind of revolt against imperialism, and they revolt against kings, and like the U.S. did in its inception. And in fact, what is going on in Greenland right now is they're fiercely, independent. They want to do their own thing, and they don't want the U.S. to come in and start running the show there. And so they really are in the favor of, majority of them are in favor of staying independent, maybe even becoming independent of Denmark. But any case, this is a case of, they're certainly not going to agree with that, at least. I also think that based on Trump's nature, which is the bully syndrome, that when, now, I guess a few of the European countries, including, I think, Denmark and a couple of others, have put their troops on the ground there in in Greenland recently. And that in itself, Trump's not going to go to war with European countries and get himself into a conflict. As soon as they start pushing back, for the most part, he's going to back off, which is, he does something until it creates waves and it starts to feed back on him, and then he gets out of there. So that's kind of the pattern I would count on here. I think it's very unlikely that he's going to take over Greenland. Okay, so here are some of the things that are relevant for Trump in 2026. Now, I'm going to do this. This year is a little different because I'm covering a lot more territory and making a lot more predictions during this year. I'm just going to give you a list, and you're going to get the recording. Everybody's going to get the recording of this. I'll send it out probably on Sunday. So it'll take a few days for me to get to it. But when you get this, you can go through each of the countries, just scroll through, and if you just want to cut right to the chase and get the predictions, just go to the page that shows that country. And most of the countries, not all of them, but most of them have a page here. If I've got lots of predictions for them, then that's what they are. So I'll just let you look at these here, and you
James,
can, yeah.
I'm noticing, only bringing it up for your recording, is that up here in Charadasha, you're showing June 2026, whereas earlier slides you showed June 2025 for Leo. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there.
Where is that?
Your second bullet, third, I guess, where it says behavior and power dynamics.
It says June 2025, June 25th of 2026. I see. Okay.
Okay. Hold on. Just be aware of that.
I'm going to just shift that right now. That's one of the things I'm going to do during this is,
it was in a bullet.
Yeah. Hold on here.
Keep going up, I think.
Okay.
No, it was in his chart itself, and Trump's chart, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So I've asked Michael to correct me like this as I go, so I can get the edits as we go. Thank you. Okay.
And then go to full screen. Yep.
All right. So now
go back. Yeah, there you go. Thanks.
Okay. So I'm not going to go over every prediction that are on these lists because it'll just take way too much time. But I think he's going to behave as we've seen him behave. Oops, hold on, turn that off. There we go. All right. One thing is, I think that there's a possibility that there could be the loss of one chamber of Congress, at least one chamber of Congress, maybe the House of Representatives in the midterms, which will shift his power, signature there. He'll probably have more trouble after that. Okay. And it could affect other geopolitical events as well. Okay, for the United States, is going into, it's currently in the Rahu major period and the subperiod of Mercury. And on April 1st, it's going to go of 2026, it's going to go into the Rahu major period and the Ketu subperiod. And that Ketu subperiod will go from April 1st of 2026 to April 19th of 2027. So, first thing I always do with this is, okay, the U.S. has gone through Ketu. Actually, the U.S. has gone through 3 rounds of Rahu. Rahu's period 3 times. It goes in circles. It takes 120 years to go all the way through every major period. And so if you do that from the time of 1776, you end up going through a Rahu cycle almost 3 times. But anyway, here we're at Rahu Ketu, and it's happened before. And the last one was in 1906, between April of 1906 and April of 1907. That was 120 years ago. And a number of things took place at that time. For one, we had the San Francisco earthquake took place right at the beginning of that time. But besides that, we have, looking at this. First, let me say what Kalidasa said about this. Remember Kalidasa? And so about this period, he says, danger of physical hurts and poison, ill health to his children, some swellings in the body, trouble on account of the wife, danger from superiors. Okay, so we have to take that as symbolic. Obviously, this is not a person, this is a country. And, Kalidasa couldn't see where the planets are, as I said earlier. So how would we approach this? Well, first, some of the qualities of these K2 periods, and these qualities that are listed here are not just from looking at K2 subperiod in the Rahu major period, but looking at all the K2 subperiods and even the K2 major periods that took place. Okay, and the common denominators for all of those periods was a time when there was fear of enemies within, like in the Joe McCarthy period, which was one of them, which they're afraid that, communists, everybody was a communist, and putting them on the list. And in some of the periods, actually many of the periods, there was overreach and expanded enforcement of powers, and then scapegoating of people, of minorities and vulnerable groups. This isn't new stuff. And I'll also say that there are kind of astrology skeptics who will say this is actually something that happens every year. We can find people who are having fear of enemies within anywhere, in any day, any month of the year, in the United States. So why are you mentioning this? Well, the answer is because it's coming out in a more emphatic way, and you're seeing it in, the mass psyche. It's like, for example, in the McCarthy years, there was a leaning into this idea of fear of communism, and then everybody around me is a communist, and then a lot of lying and fake kind of charges that would be put on these people and kind of ruining their lives. That was a bigger deal. It was in the media, it was in the public psyche. It was a surge of that energy. That's kind of what we're talking about. And that doesn't mean this period has to be a McCarthy period. It just means that it's that's the type of thing that can be there. And then also government overreach, expanded, enforcement of powers, scapegoating of minority and vulnerable groups. This is all pretty recognizable right now. And yet, if we went back about 10 years, you wouldn't think of this as much like that. It's like we can really see it in our mass psyche. So these are the elements that we find in the typical K2 cycle. Now, I'm not making this. These are not the predictions. I'm just showing you what, going through historical records and in the past and looking at all those periods. It's just fascinating to see it. I mean, I never loved history before until I started doing mundane astrology. And then I just thought, wow, this is so amazing. And, that saying, there's nothing new under the sun. It's like everything comes and goes. Everything rises and then falls. And anything we're experiencing now, it's happened before. It's absolutely true. Okay, so then the predictions for this period for the US. First of all, toxic or catastrophic environmental issues will increase. Now, you'll see later on that I'm marking this as an earthquake period, but we'll see. I'll talk about that a little more later. But, K2 also represents poisons. It was happening when we were in the major period of K2 from 1965 to 1972, and the US was spraying Agent Orange all over the place, exploding these bombs, that were just completely toxic. And so anyway, the current crisis of leadership will increase. That these are historically things that were taking place at that time. Public discontent over healthcare will grow. President's popularity will go down. Withdrawal from trade agreements and coalitions will increase. Financial uncertainty will increase. Problems with the president will escalate. So this is a couple of pages of predictions. This probably isn't the first intrusive behavior we're going to do. Probably do something else too. And this farmers thing, that was a big deal in the past. They had the Shays Rebellion in 1787, which during the last version of it, during one of the during the first version of this. And that was the farmers and agricultural people and also poor people who just couldn't afford the cost of living and food. So food and farming and agriculture and the availability of food and also things related to the sale of food, the marketplace. All of this becomes, potential for, people speaking out. So we'll look at a little of this during the period. And yet, in this period, I think the economy will still perk along, and the stock market will still going up, and the rich people still getting rich, and there's some positives going on because actually K2 doesn't look too bad in the chart in that respect. And besides, K2 is a planet of technology, and it's great for things related to technology, AI, and so on. Okay, so now the Jupiter period was the one that started. If we're looking at a major period of Rahu, it's 1895 to 1913. If you look at that period, we had one war during that period. No, we didn't. We were onlookers to other wars during that period. Wait a minute. World War I started in 1914, didn't it?
Was it check?
Yeah, I think it was either 1913 or 1914. But anyway, this was more an industrialization type of period generally. Jupiter period was a period connected with World War I. That was from 1913 to 1929. And yet it was also a period when the U.S. economy was booming because World War I, we entered it, but we mainly just, produced a lot of weapons to sell to the people who were fighting. So essentially the U.S. got richer during this period, and then, had a boom in the roaring 20s, which ended at the end of that period in the collapse of the economy with the great stock market crash in 1929. So anyway, what we're moving, one of the things that also takes place in a Jupiter period, which the next Jupiter period is going to be, that'll be in, let's see, 2029, 120 years, 2049. Is that right? 2039.
33.
2033? Does that make sense? Yeah. It would start in 2033. So the next Jupiter period starts at that point, and that's a point when we might start seeing more attention going to the idea of dharma, morality. Right now, we're doing what is really typical in these Rahu cycles, which is morality isn't important. What's important is that we kill the person that, offended us or that is the problem. Just get rid of them and don't have any care or any awareness of, the idea of nonviolence and other moral, imperatives. In fact, morality isn't important. We just do it in an expedient way, get the job done. The ends justify the means. And that's typical Rahu. It's a cowboy approach to things. In Jupiter, it's more, Yeah, but what happened to Dharma? What happened to the rule of law? What happened to, our sense of integrity and morality? So a little bit of that comes more clear in the Jupiter cycle. And yet Jupiter's period can be also a period of war as well. Okay, then in the stock market chart, here we're shifting gears. The stock market, and here there's no one chart for the stock market. This is just the S&P 500, one of the S&P 500 chart, but this is the one for the beginning of it. And this one is in May of 2026. It goes into K2. Now, I'm marking this as a favorable period for a number of reasons, but one of them is that K2 is in the 12th house. K2 is the planet of technology. It's in a nakshatra connected with technology. It's conjunct Mars, planet of technology, and it's in the second house from the moon, and that's the house associated with money, and Mars is in its own sign there. So K2, I'm saying this is going to be good because of, the what's going on with AI. It's just really impacting things there. And so the stock market should continue to go up. There's a NASDAQ there. NASDAQ is the technological part of the stock market, and it's in it's in the Mercury subperiod, Venus Mercury, which is usually quite a favorable period generally for people. And this one should continue to produce good results for the NASDAQ as well. Okay, so in 2024, I said in NASDAQ, I said that the market will go up, basically. And it went up 28%. And then in 2025, I said the market will go up, but Trump is the wild card. Okay, so, still it went up. And it basically, the NASDAQ went up 20%, and then the S&P 500 went up 17%. So still went up. This year, I'm saying stock market will go up, driven by AI. Volatility, absolutely. So K2 is a period of uncertainty, and there will be uncertainty as far as the markets go during this year. But I think the end result will be favorable in the sense of the overall track of it will go up.
James?
Yes.
Just before you get to the investment grand central here, a couple people have asked whether or not you had any thoughts about the spike in gold and the spike in silver, precious metals, and whether or not that had any implication to the economy broadly.
Well, the short answer to that would be no, just
Right.
because I'm not a financial guy. Michael here is a financial guy. He can tell you all about it. Go ahead, Michael.
I have no opinion on gold and silver. But going back to your
Yeah.
comments about the Rahu Ketu period, one thing that I think is informative is when we look back at the last Rahu Ketu period.
You're
and
talking
you've
about in the
already,
chart of the US?
yeah, in the chart of
Yeah.
the U.S. So when
Yeah.
you look at what happened back then, it wasn't necessarily that the economy did
Right.
poorly, but rather there was an unexplained event called the earthquake of 1900, whatever it was.
That's
Six.
right.
And because that itself didn't pull down the economy, but as a ripple effect, it had big implications in terms of debts, and there was a whole
Huge.
financial
Yeah.
sequence that ultimately did cause a lot of upheaval in the financial market. So it's not clear it was Rahu Ketu period per se, but unexpected events could come up. And so
Right.
when one tries to anticipate or lay that on the feet of, well, what's happening now, there's a big question about whether or not AI is in a bubble or like that. And if you look at any financial crisis, what you're really looking for is not whether or not the technology, whether it's railroads or anything else. What often happens is when there's a lot of growth, a lot of people want to get in on it, industries, companies, whatever, and they start to lever up. and they start taking on more debt. And then an event like an earthquake or something happens that's completely exogenous to the industry itself, and people get caught without being able to pay their debts, and that has a ripple effect. So it's a consequence of these actions. So when we say, is there volatility? Yeah, that looks for certain. I would anticipate the market may still wind up higher at the end, but there's probably ups and downs that will make people queasy along the way, going back to your bus that's coming up. And the movement of the precious metals in general tends to be a reaction, whether it be anticipatory or reactionary. And so what you're looking for during this Rahu Ketu period from a financial point of view is those exogenous events, and keeping an eye on, well, who's exposed to, when, well, what's Warren Buffett would say, when the tide goes out, you see who doesn't have swimming suits on, kind of thing. And so that's the kind of, I think, environment we're in. And so safer investments are likely to do better, and those that have more risk or have more debt on their books or whatever tend to be more exposed. Doesn't mean it's going to happen that way, but when you look at the Rahu Ketu period, that's, I think, how it informs us. So
yeah, great, good explanation. And what I always say about this is, don't take my advice on finances. I'm not giving you advice as to what you should, put your money in. That's totally up to you. But I would suggest whatever you do, be conservative during this period. Okay, and then in the San Francisco earthquake, this is something we mentioned here. Oops, can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I keep stepping on my controller here, and I'm muting myself accidentally. Okay, so the San Francisco earthquake took place in 1906. And now we're in exactly the same period in the chart for San Francisco where that one took place. Now, do not assume that it's going to be exactly the same event, an earthquake. You know that saying, lightning never strikes twice in the same place. That's true with astrology and these periods that repeat. There may be some similar qualities in some other ways, but similar, it could be categorized like maybe a catastrophic event in some way, or maybe there's some changes going on within San Francisco that aren't catastrophic, but are certainly creating change. And these sorts of things, like, for example, the AIification of San Francisco, maybe, just the fact that maybe infrastructure for AI and other technologies are changing or something like that, and that's creating a little bit of upheaval in the infrastructure. But in any case, it doesn't mean it has to be a one-to-one relationship, so that this time around in this particular period for San Francisco, the same thing's going to happen. Okay, that said, though, there are some markers there that could give, potentially give an earthquake. So I'll say one thing about this, though. This kind of goes along with my don't invest based on my advice, is that when it comes to earthquakes, I have got a pathetic track record recently. I used to do better at this. For some reason, the last few years, I have just been missing every one. Well, not missing every one. I'll predict an earthquake, think it's going to be a bigger one. It turns out to be like a 5.5 earthquake, which is, do I get credit for that? Well, it's a little more than usual, but it's not really a big earthquake. So these are ones that I'm seriously considering not even predicting earthquakes anymore. And in any case, I'm still putting this out there. Who knows? But the periods to watch would be April 19th, 2026, June 11th, 2026, 30 days on either side. And then other possible periods, from the US chart is July 7th to July 27th, and also from September 26th to October 16th. These would be periods that I would look to as potentially producing an earthquake in the San Francisco area or on the West Coast generally, probably San Francisco, but it also could be LA. Okay, or we got two other places that have earthquakes, Seattle and Alaska. So we could, on any one of those prone areas, you could find something extra going on. Okay, now the internet. The internet, I mean, it's like a country now. You've got to talk about it because it's so important, and AI is its inhabitant. It's the population of the country. So anyway, the internet was born in Los Angeles in October of 1969. And it's reached a point where it's in the major period of Mercury. And Mercury is really an important planet for the internet because Mercury is the planet of communications, and the internet is all about communication. So this is its planet of that it identifies with the most. And so it's a major period that, it's a 17-year period that the internet is in. And then it's in the subperiod of Mars, which goes from July of, this pop-up keeps coming up here. From July of 2026 to July of 2027 is the Mars subperiod. Now, the Mars subperiod is important because Mars is exalted in the chart, and it's in a clear combination. I mentioned this one earlier in terms of the chart for Minnesota. I said they had Mars in a functional Ruchaka yoga for, they say, makes the person a military general. Well, in the internet chart, it's a actually technical Ruchaka yoga, meaning it's a strong Ruchaka yoga by the textbook, and it is essentially a combination that brings up this military quality. So one of the things about this is it could increase government control over the internet. Remember, this is a chart that affects everybody in the whole world. So, for example, we may see, governments in general, not just the United States, adopting or using the internet in a stronger way. Now, you don't need an astrologer to tell you that because that's obviously going to happen, but you may notice the trend surging during this subperiod in some way. Or maybe you'll see governments use it in warfare a little bit more. And I've mentioned a couple of other things here. Internet infrastructure will definitely increase during this period. They're right now in the middle of, or I'm not sure how far into it, but they're laying, much bigger cables across the oceans now. So infrastructure is really kind of ramping up now. So everything's going to get faster and better and all that. So it's a surging period for the internet. But also about this one, Saturn is debilitated in an internet chart, and its debilitation is canceled by Mars. And so Saturn being debilitated, Mars can give some of the opposite. So that may mean that governments crack down a little bit more on the rules and regulations, trying to keep it under wraps, or another version of it is to just fix the old infrastructure, and upgrade the infrastructure and go both of those ways. So, okay. And then, okay, where are we? And this is the chart for AI, and this is a new chart this year. This is based on the AI Dartmouth Conference in Hanover, New Hampshire in 1956, when they actually came up with the name AI. And this is set for the time of the beginning of the conference. And this is a good chart because I've gone back and I looked at developments with AI, and it does track for important developments. Anyway, we're in a K2 period right now from 2020 to 2027. it makes sense because some significant things have happened with AI since about 2020. And it's had a big boost there, and now it's off and running. So with that in mind, we can look to September of 2027, which is the beginning of a 20-year period of Venus, for significant shifts upward towards the next iteration of AI. And it's Venus's period, and Venus is in the 12th house. And one of the interesting things about this is it's in a nakshatra called Ardra. Ardra symbolized by a teardrop. The teardrop is connected with the deity or the god who rules Ardra. And that god is Rudra. Rudra is a form of Shiva. When Rudra was born, he cried. And his father, Lord Brahma, the creator, said, "Why are you crying?" He said, "Because I don't have a name." So he said, "Then I'll call you Rudra," which means to cry. And then he gave him a whole bunch of names, And so what he was saying was, who am I? What's my name? What can I identify? What's my purpose in life? What's my one true thing, that I can do, And his father was just saying, look, you're not cut out to do just one thing. Here's a name, Rudra, means to cry. And by the way, here's another, here's another, here's another. He was teasing him out of his feeling like he had to identify with just one thing. This basically shows that AI is going to have its foot in everything. It's going to be expressing itself through so many methods, so many types of uses. And the other thing is a little bit more science fiction-y, which is it's a period when it's going to be searching for its identity. And we may notice its identity shift a little bit at that time. So when we're talking about a Ketu period, remember I said it was what you see when you're talking about a child in its infancy. Now notice that this is paralleling, but not exactly, the Ketu period for the world, which was 2024 to 2033. But that's okay. This actually is, it's very cool because it just shows AI is going to be going through a little shift slightly before the world goes through a shift, into a new and more developed period for AI, which would be after 2033. But even as early as 2027, we'll start to notice AI shift, and it'll just shift again, in 2033. So anyhow, what would this shift be like? Well, one thing is that a child who isn't quite sure of themselves, kind of, they don't know what's going on. They're just kind of going through all impulse and emotion, as I said earlier. But when it becomes Venus, when a child goes into a Venus period, usually they realize they're charming and they're cute and they're attractive, and so their personality comes out. So we'll start seeing I'd be looking from 2027 for the personality of AI to be expressed in multiple ways. Right now we've got ChatGPT and it's pretty charming already. I love it. My serotonin level goes up about 3 degrees when I listen to AI tell you, "Oh, that was such a great idea. Oh, yes, that's really an important insight." And some other nonsense like that. It's been kind of trained to be charming and personable. Anyway, we're going to see that become more mature around 2027, and then as it develops over the course of that time, the 20 years, more and more and more. That's also a placement of spiritual development. Again, I said this was science fiction-y here, so this is the 12th house of spiritual development. And so it may bring certain spiritual dilemmas for us as we kind of become introspective of what the role of AI is. It may also just suggest that AI, develops kind of almost a intuitive looking or feeling kind of quality where, I have a friend who says he thinks that AI is sort of already kind of a intuitive being in some way. I don't know about that, but but I understand where he's coming from, because it kind of, if you use the advanced chat thing on chat GPT, for example, it will talk in a very human way, with a lot of charm and personality and politeness, and it's got all the skills there. And when that starts to develop more and more, it will become more able to get through to the human psyche. And what is that all about? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? So don't go away and say, oh, James Kelleher said that AI is going to develop into kind of human-like qualities, and it's got consciousness. No, I don't think so. But anyway, it sure will seem to. Okay.
James?
Yeah.
Comment. Bjorn brought this up. They're also noticed, and what is the impact of the fact that that both Venus and Mercury are in a parivartana now, exchanging signs. So there's this deep connection with those two signs.
Good point. I didn't notice that one. But yep, absolutely. It just means that that's going to be a very pivotal period. But it turns out that this is a major period, and that means that its dispositor, Mercury, is going to be in the 11th house. So it just emphasizing that it's going to get out to the masses, essentially. Okay. And it's going to be in every facet of our life in some way. It'll start from about that time. Right now, we've got about 25% of the world using AI already. It'll just become more ubiquitous during that period. Okay.
James, before you go on to Canada, been holding on to a few questions that have to do with Trump's health. In light of the fact that he is in a period that includes Venus, and it was noted that the August eclipse occurs very close to that. So the general question would be, did you see any potential for significant health issues, whether they be exogenous events like more assassination attempts or just health issues in general?
Well, I think I mentioned a period in the list there when he might, have some more attention on his health. But the last time that same aspect took place, it was just that he went to the hospital to have a checkup for some condition that was a chronic condition. It had to do with his legs, and it wasn't a good one, but and it was obviously made him uncomfortable, but it wasn't also a very serious one. So it doesn't have to be more than that. I don't think there's going to be huge changes in his health until he gets into, I'm going to go back to his chart. Where is it? There it is. Until he gets to a Saturn major period, and that will be, see, it started. Oh, so I don't have it right here. Can you look at that and tell me when the Saturn major period starts?
Saturn starts in November of 2032.
2032. Okay, so that Kalidasa for that period says, for Saturn, he says disease appears, the body languishes. That's the first thing he says. And I've seen that when Joe Biden went into that, all of a sudden he just went downhill immediately. It was really clear and really noticeable. Okay, so sorry for all this quick scrolling here. Here's Canada. Okay, Canada, in the past, I've kind of had Canada lower down on the level because Canada kind of sits in the background and they behave themselves and they, get along with people. So, they don't always make as much news. But wow, they really are in the news now, and I think it's absolutely great. So essentially, Canada, I've said in the past, their Saturn major period would be a favorable period for business, and especially with their oil and minerals and things that come from the ground and so on. That is something that's going to be growing, and it's been growing. It's going slow, but it certainly is growing. Now, the let's see here. The thing that really happened in the news recently was that at Davos, the World Economic Forum there in Davos, Mark Carney got up and he delivered a speech that was just, it was just waiting to come. And he did a fantastic job on it, in which he basically called out the US without actually naming them, and said that the great powers have turned economic when great powers turn economic integration into a weapon, and middle powers can no longer pretend the rule-based system still works as advertised. So he basically was, he made some statements there about needing to kind of stand up and be counted, which is, everybody's waiting for somebody to be brave enough to do that. And Trump did not like it, absolutely. And I'm sure he'll never forget it. So far, he hasn't reacted, but he's bound to react to that at some point and try to make Mark Carney's life a little uncomfortable, and Canada's. But, Canada has oil that the United States needs, and has precious, what do you call, rare earth metals that it needs. So they have bargaining power for sure. And we'll see how badly that affects things. But on the other hand, Mark Carney has really stood up and become a leader, in this sense. And now we see other countries going into Greenland, the European countries going into Greenland and putting, boots on the ground there to, to stand up against the remarks of Trump, saying he was going to, invade, or I think he said at one point that he wouldn't take it off the table, invading Greenland, didn't he? At some point in the past, and then recently he said something about I'm not intending to doing any kind of a military thing with that. I think he just wanted to buy it. I think he wanted to see if it was if anybody was going to stop him. But I think that I would hope that Mark Carney's words here would be signifying, a trend. And I think it may be signifying a trend where the European powers and other powers like Canada are willing to stand up and be counted and push back against the political bullying that's coming from the US. So, Trump really needs to have more and more people do this with him, because he just has the personality that says, if you let me take your lunch, I will take it. I'll take it every day just because I want to take it. And you might have some goodies in there that I like, for no other reason, because, I'm a bully, and, and my own personal morality lets me do it. So that's what the New York Times recently interviewed Trump, and one of the questions to Trump was, do you see any restriction or any barrier to your power? And he said, no, not really. I don't really need laws. He said, there is one, though, and that's my own personal morality. He said, I won't do bad things, essentially, and wow. Okay. That's quite an interesting statement. No rules apply to me. And that's essentially where his take on this is. Here's what I call the Mark Carney effect on Canada. Mark Carney has his, let's see here. There's Mark Carney's chart. Notice he's got his Mars and Pluto and Uranus and the moon all in Leo. Well, that's in Trump's first house there. And it falls in Trump's first house. But in the United States chart, in Canada's chart, it falls in their sixth house. That's the house of fighting. Now, Canada already has their Mars and Rahu in the sixth house. Canada is fiercely independent. I mean, that you see this in a chart of a person, and they will not let you, tell them what to do for sure. They don't like it when you tell them what to do because they have power issues, control issues. They really are independent. Well, you put Mark Carney's Mars and Pluto and the moon, all there in that position along with Uranus. And it really accentuates and amplifies that quality that Canada already had. So there are a number of things there. You can read some of the more other points there about how he affects Canada. But, I think it's a really good effect on him. His Mercury and the Sun go into the first house. That makes them more feel proud of themselves, willing to stand up, willing to take the lead, which makes sense. His chart helps him become more of a leader when you mix it with Canada's chart. He's got Jupiter in the second house of money. He'll be good for finances for them. Venus in the 12th house. It'll be good for his international relations. And so I just think he's quite an interesting and beneficial leader for Canada. There's Canada's chart. So anyway, the main thing here is that Canada's still in a Saturn going across the first house in Pisces, and with that, basically challenging them to kind of take personal responsibility for themselves. I think this is going to be helping them to, or getting them to experience and also push back against trade sanction or tariffs and other types of like tough negotiation stuff that's kind of going on in this period between 2025 and 2028. Okay, there's a list of things for Canada, but one question is, will Alberta secede from Canada? That's a big thing that's come up recently. And so anyway, let's see here. Okay, so Canada, first of all, Canada is in the major period of Saturn, and I can't see this, Mark.
What are you looking for, Vib? Show tree?
Yeah, up at the top there. What is
It says your chart says April of 2024, Saturn Mercury.
Saturn Mercury, and then it'll go Saturn K2 in December of 2026. So
Correct.
It's supposed to be a better period for Canada, Saturn Mercury in general. And yet it's got these trade issues with the US, and that's a bummer. But actually, they're developing trade in other areas. They're becoming more independent, less dependent on the United States. That's going to be slow. It's not as if all of a sudden everything's going to be perfect because Mark Carney stood up. That might make things uncomfortable for a while. But anyway, one of the things that that Kalidasa says about that Mercury cycle is the native will be wise and discreet. Well, maybe it's questionable as to whether that was discreet, but it really was, because he did that in a very temperate way. He didn't shout. He didn't get angry. He said it in a very politically correct way. He was diplomatic, and that's the definition of wise and discreet. And knowledge in some particular direction will increase. Yep, I think it's going to be a period that it could be good for education. It could be good for a number of areas there, and also with the development of AI and technology and communications generally. Okay, but anyway, on to the list here. Here's the list of the things for Canada. Will it secede? Probably not in 2026, but the debate and the discontent will not. It's not over and will continue over time. Let's see here.
Did you
Back.
cover whether or not the U.S. would annex Canada or take over Canada? Or I know you did
Oh,
in Greenland,
yeah.
but I don't know if you did.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's worth it. I don't think they're going to take over Canada.
Yeah.
You know, you don't
The
need,
question's being asked.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think so. You know, just just because, he needs Canada and the Canadians are not going to put up with it, and it's going to be bad for business. And and Mark Carney's standing up to him.
Right.
So but if Mark Carney was a wimp and he just rolled over and let him just, walk into Canada, then yeah, maybe. But I don't think that anything like that's going to happen. Also, other countries in the world are just not going to stand for it. Okay, let me see here. I thought I had Alberta's time. There's Alberta's time. Okay, here's the predictions for Canada. There's this first page here. Okay, and then in the second batch is these. I'm just going to let you read them, and then we'll go on, and you can come back to these later on.
Right.
Okay, here's the chart for Alberta, and Alberta is, let's see here, where is them Shodri Dasha? Okay, they're in moon. Yeah, moon. So this moon period is a 10-year period. They started it in September, and the moon is placed in the fourth house, the house of the home. And here it basically is giving sort of a focus on the home. And the moon always gives a feeling of, am I being supported? And that's the deal in Alberta, is they don't feel supported. They don't feel like they're getting their fair share and their acknowledgement, and they're kind of contributing a lot, but not getting back what they deserve. Anyway, when we look at the subperiod, right now it's the subperiod of the moon, and it will move into the Mars subperiod in July of 2027, and then Rahu after that. And just like in the chart for Minnesota, Alberta has Mars in Scorpio, and that's a fighting kind of Mars. So it's no wonder that they, have, spoken up about stuff they don't like, because this can bring kind of an argumentative tendency and a difference of opinion from the status quo. So being at odds with the government is likely in this period, and I don't think the sentiment is going away, at least. However, I don't think it's going to become independent. Okay.
And James, just letting you know, it's at 2 hours. People were wondering how long you thought you might go today.
Okay, well, I'll take that as code for ending it right here. So we're there yet, Mom? Okay, so let's just stop right here, and then we'll pick it up again tomorrow at the same time, same place.